Zix Theta stood before the massive viewing screen in the Kethalari command center, watching stars drift slowly past. The observer's four arms moved in nervous patterns while waiting for Commander Velnari to arrive. Today would bring a new assignment, and Zix Theta hoped it would be more interesting than the last few missions. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Velnari entered, carrying a datapad and wearing the serious expression that meant important business. The commander's silver skin gleamed under the blue lights of the command room. "Observer Zix Theta," Velnari began, "you have been selected for a special mission by the Galactic Coalition Council." Zix Theta's large black eyes widened with interest. Special missions were rare and usually meant observing some new species or studying unusual military tactics. The observer had spent years documenting various alien combat methods, always finding them predictable and boring. "What kind of mission, Commander?" Zix Theta asked. Velnari touched the datapad, and holographic images appeared in the air between them. The images showed a species that looked strange to Zix Theta. They had only 2 arms, 2 legs, and small eyes. Their skin came in different shades of brown and pink. They looked weak and primitive. "These are humans," Velnari explained. "They are new members of the Coalition. The Council wants to know if they deserve full membership status." Zix Theta studied the images. The humans looked nothing like the advanced species that usually joined the Coalition. Most member species had evolved past physical combat, using energy weapons and mental warfare instead. These humans still appeared to rely on basic tools and simple strategies. "What do you want me to observe?" Zix Theta asked. "The humans are fighting a war against the Vorth Empire. The Vorth have been attacking Coalition colonies, and the humans volunteered to help stop them. You will watch how humans fight and report back on their military skills. The Vorth Empire was known throughout the galaxy for their brutal tactics and advanced weapons. They had defeated several Coalition species in the past. If the humans thought they could fight the Vorth, they were either very brave or very stupid." Velnari continued. "You will board a human military ship and observe their combat operations. Document their weapons, tactics, and leadership abilities. The Council needs to know if humans can be trusted with Coalition military secrets." Zix Theta felt excited for the first time in months. This would be much more interesting than watching peaceful species negotiate trade agreements. Even if the humans were primitive, at least there would be some action to observe. "When do I leave?" Zix Theta asked. "Tomorrow. Pack light. Human ships are smaller than ours and their gravity is different. You will be gone for several weeks." The next day, Zix Theta arrived at the docking bay where a small transport ship waited. The trip to human space took 3 days. During the journey, Zix Theta studied human files and learned basic facts about their species. Humans came from a planet called Earth. They had only discovered space travel recently. They fought many wars among themselves before joining the Coalition. The transport ship dropped Zix Theta at a human space station. The station looked crude compared to Kethalari technology. Metal walls, harsh white lights, and strange smells filled the corridors. Humans walked everywhere, talking loudly and moving with quick, jerky motions. A human approached Zix Theta. He was tall with dark hair and wore a blue uniform covered in small metal decorations. "You must be our Coalition observer," the human said. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison, commanding officer of the USS Defiant." Zix Theta found the human's voice rough and unpleasant compared to the musical tones of Kethalari speech. Captain Morrison seemed friendly enough, but his small eyes made it hard to read his emotions. "I am Observer Zix Theta. I am here to document your military operations. Welcome aboard. Let me show you to your quarters, then we'll give you a full briefing on our mission." Captain Morrison led Zix Theta through narrow corridors filled with pipes and cables. Everything looked temporary and poorly built. The ship creaked and groaned as it moved through space. Zix Theta wondered how humans expected to fight an advanced enemy with such primitive equipment. The observer's quarters were tiny. A small bed, a desk, and a viewing port made up the entire room. Zix Theta's 4 arms barely fit in the narrow space. This would be an uncomfortable few weeks. An hour later, Captain Morrison brought Zix Theta to a meeting room where several other humans waited. They all wore similar uniforms and had serious expressions on their faces. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks," Morrison said, pointing to a human with short blonde hair. "She commands our ground forces." Amy Brooks nodded at Zix Theta. "Pleased to meet you, Observer. I hope you're ready for some real action." Morrison introduced the others. Sergeant Paul Davis was a short, muscular human with scars on his face. Dr. Lisa Grant was a thin human with glasses who studied military psychology. Major Chris Bell handled tactical operations. Our mission is simple, Amy Brooks began. The Vorth Empire has taken control of a human colony called New Haven. They're using it as a base to attack other coalition worlds. We're going to take it back. Zix Theta listened as the humans explained their plan. It seemed basic and straightforward. They would arrive at New Haven, attack the Vorth forces, and retake the colony. There was no mention of advanced tactics or sophisticated weapons. How many Vorth soldiers are defending the colony? Zix Theta asked. About 10,000, Sergeant Davis replied, plus orbital defense platforms and ground installations. How many human soldiers do you have? 3,000 Marines and support personnel, Amy Brooks answered. Zix Theta was shocked. The humans planned to attack a force more than 3 times their size with primitive weapons and simple tactics. This would be a massacre, and the observer would have a front row seat to watch the humans get destroyed. Dr. Lisa Grant seemed to notice Zix Theta's concern. Don't worry, observer. Humans have been fighting against bad odds for thousands of years. We've learned a few tricks. The meeting continued for another hour. The humans discussed supply lines, communication systems, and medical support. Everything sounded normal and boring. Zix Theta began to think this mission would be a waste of time. The humans would attack, get defeated quickly, and the observer would write a short report about their failure. That night, Zix Theta lay in the tiny quarters listening to the ship's strange noises. Footsteps echoed in the corridors at all hours. Voices called out in harsh human languages. The observer wondered what tricks Dr. Grant had mentioned. Probably some clever use of their primitive technology, or maybe better coordination than other species expected. Tomorrow they would reach New Haven, and Zix Theta would finally see humans in combat. The observer expected to document a brave but futile effort against superior Vorth forces. It would be sad but quick. Zix Theta had no idea that the next few weeks would change everything the observer thought about warfare, violence, and the true nature of the species called humans. The USS Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a shudder that made Zix Theta grab onto the nearest wall. Human ships were much rougher than the smooth Kethalari vessels the observer was used to. Through the viewing port, Zix Theta could see the New Haven system ahead. Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands prepare for combat operations. We have arrived at our destination. Zix Theta hurried to the bridge where the human command crew was already working at their stations. The main screen showed New Haven, a small planet covered in green and blue. Several large structures orbited the planet, and red warning lights blinked on the human displays. Vorth defense platforms, Major Chris Bell reported. 12 heavy weapons platforms in orbital positions. They've got enough firepower to destroy anything that gets close to the planet. Amy Brooks studied the tactical display. What about ground forces? Sensors show at least 8,000 Vorth soldiers spread across the main colony site. They've built defensive walls and weapon emplacements around the settlement. Zix Theta watched the humans work. Their equipment looked primitive, but they seemed to know how to use it effectively. The observer expected them to begin planning a direct assault, following standard coalition military procedures. Instead, Captain Morrison turned to Dr. Lisa Grant. Doctor, is your psychological warfare package ready? All systems prepared, Captain. We can begin broadcasting as soon as we're in range. Zix Theta had never heard of psychological warfare. Among the Kethalari and other coalition species, combat was a clean affair. Armies met in open battle, used their weapons efficiently, and the side with better technology usually won. There was no need for tricks or unusual tactics. What is psychological warfare? Zix Theta asked. Dr. Grant smiled, but there was something cold in her expression. We attack the enemy's mind before we attack their bodies. Fear is a powerful weapon, observer. The ship moved closer to New Haven. When they reached communication range, Dr. Grant activated her equipment. Strange sounds began broadcasting toward the Vorth positions. At first, Zix Theta thought it was music or perhaps some kind of code. Then the observer realized what the sounds actually were: screaming. The humans were broadcasting recordings of Vorth soldiers screaming in pain and terror. Mixed with the screams were other sounds: weapons firing, explosions, and what sounded like Vorth death cries. Where did you get these recordings? Zix Theta asked, feeling disturbed. From previous battles, Sergeant Paul Davis replied. We record everything. Then we use it against the next group of enemies. The psychological attack continued for 6 hours. The human ship stayed just out of range of the Vorth weapons while broadcasting the horrible sounds. Zixatheta watched the tactical displays and noticed something strange. The Vorth orbital platforms were moving out of their defensive positions. "They're breaking formation," Major Bell reported. "The platform commanders are repositioning to get away from our broadcast signals." Amy Brooks nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Confused enemies make mistakes. Davis, prepare your reconnaissance teams." Sergeant Davis selected 20 Marines for the reconnaissance mission. These humans looked different from the regular crew. They moved quietly, checked their weapons constantly, and had a dangerous look in their eyes. Their equipment was painted in dark colors, and they carried extra knives and tools. "What is the reconnaissance team's mission?" Zixatheta asked. "They're going to visit the Vorth positions and leave some presents," Davis replied. The reconnaissance teams took small, fast ships toward New Haven's surface. They avoided the Vorth sensors and landed in areas far from the enemy positions. Zixatheta watched their progress on the ship's tracking systems. For the next 2 days, the reconnaissance teams moved around the planet. They never engaged the Vorth forces directly, but strange things began happening at the enemy positions. Supply convoys disappeared. Communication towers were found destroyed in the morning. Vorth patrols discovered their own equipment sabotaged in ways that seemed impossible. More disturbing were the psychological effects. The reconnaissance teams left behind evidence of their presence, but not normal military signs. They arranged Vorth equipment in strange patterns. They left recordings playing in empty buildings. They painted symbols on walls using substances that Zixatheta preferred not to think about. "Why don't your soldiers just attack the enemy directly?" Zixatheta asked Amy Brooks. "Because frightened enemies are easier to kill," she replied. "When the Vorth soldiers are scared, tired, and confused, they can't fight effectively. Fear is our best ally." On the 3rd day, the first real combat began. A Vorth patrol encountered one of Sergeant Davis's teams near the colony's outer perimeter. Zixatheta watched the battle through drone cameras, expecting to see standard military tactics. Instead, the observer witnessed something that would haunt the rest of the mission. The human Marines didn't just fight the Vorth soldiers. They hunted them. When a Vorth warrior tried to retreat, the humans followed. When wounded, Vorth called for help. The humans used those calls to locate and attack rescue teams. Private Tony Walsh took a plasma blast to his shoulder that would have killed most species. Instead of seeking medical attention, he used his injury to lure Vorth soldiers into an ambush. The human endured terrible pain to make his act convincing, then killed 3 enemies who thought he was helpless. "Your soldier is badly wounded," Zixatheta pointed out. "Why doesn't he withdraw from combat?" "Because the mission isn't finished," Davis replied. "Walsh will fight until he can't move anymore. That's what Marines do." The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 15 Vorth soldiers were dead. The human team had only 1 serious casualty, but Tony Walsh refused evacuation. He bandaged his wound and continued the mission. That night, Zixatheta tried to process what had been witnessed. The humans didn't fight like any species in the coalition. They used fear as a weapon, endured pain that should have been impossible, and showed a determination that seemed almost insane. Dr. Grant found Zixatheta in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. "You look troubled." "Observer," she said. "I don't understand your tactics. Why do you make war so complicated? Why not just attack with superior numbers and technology?" Dr. Grant sat down across from Zixatheta. "Because humans learned long ago that the mind is the most important battlefield. If you can break an enemy's spirit, their weapons and numbers don't matter. But the psychological torture, the fear tactics, the refusal to show mercy to wounded enemies, these methods seem cruel." "War is cruel," Dr. Grant replied. "The question is whether you want to be cruel efficiently or inefficiently." "We choose efficiency." Zixatheta thought about the Kethalari approach to conflict. When the observer's species fought, they did so with honor and restraint. Battles had rules. Enemies were treated with respect. Wounded soldiers received medical care regardless of which side they fought for. The humans seem to have no such limitations. "Tomorrow we begin the main assault," Dr. Grant continued. "You'll see what human soldiers can really accomplish when we stop holding back." After Dr. Grant left, Zixatheta remained in the observation lounge for several more hours. The observer had expected to document primitive human tactics and simple weapons. Instead, Zixatheta was beginning to realize that human warfare operated on levels of complexity and ruthlessness that other species had never imagined. The reconnaissance phase was over. Soon the real battle would begin, and Zixa Theta had a growing fear that the observer was about to witness something far worse than anyone in the coalition had ever suspected humans were capable of accomplishing. The main assault on New Haven began before dawn on the fourth day. Zixa Theta stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching as human landing craft descended toward the planet's surface. The observer expected a traditional military attack, with soldiers advancing in formation against enemy positions. Instead, the humans did something that shocked Zix Theta to the core. "Target the colony's power grid," Captain Morrison ordered. "Sir, that will cut electricity to civilian areas," Major Bell replied. "That's the point. Make sure the Vorth soldiers know that their actions have consequences for everyone on the planet." Zixa Theta watched in horror as human ships fired precisely aimed weapons at New Haven's power stations. The attacks weren't random destruction. The humans carefully targeted systems that would cause maximum disruption while leaving critical life support intact. Within minutes, most of New Haven went dark. Emergency power kept hospitals and water treatment facilities running, but everything else shut down. The colony's 10,000 human civilians were suddenly living in darkness, and everyone knew the Vorth occupation was to blame. "You're using civilians as weapons against the enemy," Zix Theta said to Amy Brooks. "We're using psychology," she replied. "The Vorth soldiers came here to control this colony. Now they have to deal with angry colonists who blame them for the power outage. Every Vorth soldier will be watching for civilian attacks instead of focusing on our Marines." The psychological warfare was only the beginning. As human landing craft reached the surface, they didn't head directly for Vorth military positions. Instead, they scattered across the planet in small groups, each team assigned to specific targets that seemed to make no military sense. One team attacked a Vorth supply depot, but instead of destroying it, they contaminated the food supplies with harmless bacteria that caused severe digestive problems. Another team sabotaged Vorth communication equipment in ways that made it work incorrectly, rather than not work at all. Messages arrived scrambled, orders were received backwards, and status reports contained false information. "Why don't you just destroy their equipment?" Zixa Theta asked Sergeant Davis. "Because broken equipment gets replaced," he replied. "Equipment that works badly causes confusion and mistrust. When Vorth commanders don't trust their own communications, they make poor decisions." The most disturbing operation involved a team led by Corporal Kate Miller, a small human female who specialized in explosives. Her team infiltrated a Vorth barracks during the night shift. Instead of planting bombs to kill sleeping soldiers, they installed devices that created strange sounds and vibrations. For the next 3 nights, Vorth soldiers in that barracks couldn't sleep properly. They heard whispers in the walls, felt their bunks shaking at random times, and found equipment moved around when they weren't looking. The psychological stress broke down unit discipline and caused paranoia among the troops. "This is torture," Zix Theta protested to Dr. Grant. "This is efficiency," she replied. "Sleep-deprived soldiers make mistakes. Paranoid soldiers don't trust their comrades. We're destroying their ability to fight effectively without wasting ammunition." By the end of the first week, the Vorth defenders were showing signs of serious psychological breakdown. Their orbital platforms moved constantly, trying to avoid the human broadcasts. Ground units reported seeing human soldiers in areas where none were supposed to be. Supply lines struggled with equipment failures and contaminated resources. The humans had accomplished something Zix Theta had never seen before. They were winning a battle without fighting a battle. Then came the direct attacks, and Zixa Theta realized that everything up to this point had just been preparation. The first major engagement occurred at dawn on the 8th day. 2,000 Vorth soldiers had fortified a hill overlooking the main colony settlement. The position had strong defensive walls, heavy weapons, and clear fields of fire in all directions. Any conventional assault would result in massive casualties for the attacking force. Amy Brooks didn't order a conventional assault. Instead, she sent Sergeant Davis and 50 Marines to attack the Vorth position from the front, making as much noise as possible. While the Vorth defenders focused on repelling this obvious assault, 200 other human soldiers approached the hill from underground. The humans had spent 3 days digging tunnels through the hill's foundation. They bypassed the Vorth defenses completely and emerged inside the enemy fortifications. The battle was over in 20 minutes, but what happened? During those 20 minutes made Zixi Theta understand that humans were unlike any species in the galaxy. The human soldiers didn't just defeat the Vorth defenders, they terrorized them. Instead of using quick, clean kills, the Marines employed weapons and tactics designed to maximize fear among survivors. Smoke grenades filled the Vorth positions with choking fog. Sonic weapons created disorienting noise that made coordination impossible. Flashbang explosives blinded and deafened enemies without killing them, leaving them helpless for the final attack. When Vorth soldiers tried to surrender, the humans accepted their surrender, then used the prisoners to spread fear among other enemy units. The captured Vorth were treated well, but were allowed to escape back to their own lines, carrying stories about human tactics that grew more terrifying with each retelling. "Why do you let prisoners escape?" Zixi Theta asked Major Bell. "Because scared enemies tell other enemies scary stories," he replied. "One terrified Vorth soldier is worth 10 dead ones when it comes to breaking enemy morale." The humans were fighting a war on levels that Zixi Theta had never imagined existed. They attacked bodies, minds, emotions, and social structures simultaneously. Every action served multiple purposes. Every tactic created fear, confusion, and psychological damage that spread throughout the enemy forces like a disease. Private Tony Walsh, still fighting despite his injuries from the reconnaissance mission, led a squad that captured a Vorth communication post. Instead of destroying it, they used it to broadcast false orders to enemy units. Vorth commanders received contradictory instructions, supply requests for non-existent units, and casualty reports that painted a picture of total human superiority. "Your soldier should be in a medical facility," Zixi Theta pointed out. "His wound has become infected and he's operating on stimulants and pain medication." Walsh volunteered to continue fighting, Amy Brooks replied. "No one is forcing him to stay in combat. But he's not thinking clearly. The drugs and infection are affecting his judgment. His judgment is fine. He's still completing his missions and keeping his squad alive. What more do you want?" Zixi Theta couldn't understand how a species could ask individuals to endure such suffering for military objectives. Among the Kethalari, injured soldiers were immediately evacuated and cared for. Personal welfare took priority over tactical advantages. The humans seemed to view personal welfare as just another resource to be used in pursuit of victory. By the end of the second week, Vorth resistance was collapsing across the entire planet. Their communication networks were compromised. Their supply lines were disrupted. Their soldiers were exhausted and paranoid, and their commanders had lost confidence in their ability to hold the colony. But the humans weren't satisfied with victory. They wanted complete surrender, and they were prepared to do whatever was necessary to achieve it. "The next phase begins tomorrow," Captain Morrison announced during the evening briefing. "We're going to show the Vorth what happens when they occupy human colonies." Zixi Theta felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature control. If everything witnessed so far was just the beginning, what were the humans planning to do next? The observer was about to find out that human warfare had depths of ruthlessness that even a species as violent as the Vorth had never encountered. The third week of the New Haven campaign began with an operation that made Zixi Theta question everything the observer thought about civilized warfare. Amy Brooks called it Operation Nightfall, and its purpose was to break the remaining Vorth resistance completely. "We're going to hit them where they feel safest," she explained during the morning briefing. "Every species needs sleep, food, and shelter. We're going to take all three away from them." The humans had identified the main Vorth command bunker, a heavily fortified underground facility that housed their senior officers and communication equipment. Instead of attacking it directly, they surrounded it with a ring of human soldiers who did nothing but wait and watch. "Why aren't your troops assaulting the bunker?" Zixi Theta asked Major Bell. "Because we don't need to," he replied. "The Vorth commanders are trapped in there with limited supplies. Every day they wait, they get weaker. Every night they don't sleep, they make worse decisions." The psychological pressure was just the beginning. Human teams led by Corporal Kate Miller had planted sound devices around the bunker that activated at random intervals. The Vorth officers inside heard explosions, weapons fire, and screaming voices at all hours. They never knew if the sounds were real attacks or just noise designed to prevent sleep. Dr. Grant monitored Vorth communications and reported their growing desperation to the command staff. "Their officers are arguing with each other. Some want to surrender, others want to attempt a breakout. Their unit discipline is collapsing." Zix Theta watched the siege with growing unease. The humans weren't just defeating their enemies, they were systematically destroying their ability to function as rational beings. The observer had never seen warfare conducted with such calculated cruelty. Is this how humans always fight? Zix Theta asked Dr. Grant. This is how we fight when we want to win quickly and permanently, she replied. The Vorth Empire has been attacking coalition worlds for years. We want to make sure they never try to attack human colonies again. But surely there are laws about the treatment of enemies. The coalition has agreements about acceptable combat methods. Dr. Grant smiled coldly. Those agreements were written by species that never fought wars like humans fight wars. We follow the spirit of the law, which is to minimize casualties and achieve victory. We're doing both. The siege of the command bunker continued for 6 days. During that time, human forces eliminated the remaining Vorth positions across New Haven, using tactics that became increasingly disturbing. One outpost was surrounded and bombarded with recordings of human children singing nursery rhymes. The psychological impact was so severe that the Vorth soldiers inside began shooting at shadows. Another Vorth position was infiltrated by Sergeant Davis and his team, who didn't attack the enemy soldiers. Instead, they sabotaged the position's food preparation equipment to create meals that looked normal, but tasted terrible. After 3 days of eating food that triggered their gag reflex, the Vorth soldiers abandoned their post without being fired upon. You're using the enemy's basic biological needs against them, Zix Theta observed. Every species has weaknesses, Davis replied. The Vorth need food that tastes familiar. They need sleep that isn't interrupted. They need leaders they can trust. We're taking all of that away from them. Private Tony Walsh had finally been forced to accept medical treatment for his infected wound, but he refused to leave active duty. The human doctors installed a portable medical unit that delivered antibiotics and pain medication directly into his bloodstream, allowing him to continue fighting while receiving treatment. Your dedication to the mission is impressive, Zix Theta told Walsh. But isn't your health more important than military objectives? Walsh looked at the observer with an expression that was part confusion and part pity. My squad is still out there fighting. How can I rest in a medical bay while my friends are in danger? But you're no longer effective in combat. Your reflexes are slow, your aim is affected by the medication, and your judgment is impaired. Maybe. But I'm still alive, and I can still pull a trigger. That's all that matters. Zix Theta couldn't understand this human attitude. Among the Kethlari, individual welfare was considered sacred. No military objective was worth permanent damage to a soldier's health or mental state. The humans seemed to view their own bodies and minds as tools to be used until they broke completely. On the 7th day of the siege, the Vorth command bunker finally sent a surrender signal. The human forces had never fired a shot at the facility, but the officers inside could no longer function. Days without proper sleep, constant psychological pressure, and the knowledge that their forces across the planet were being systematically destroyed had broken their will to continue. Amy Brooks accepted their surrender, but the terms she offered shocked Zix Theta. All Vorth military personnel will be evacuated from New Haven immediately, she announced. They will also withdraw from 3 other coalition worlds and provide reparations for damages caused during their occupation. You're demanding concessions beyond this single battle, Zix Theta pointed out. We're ending this war, Brooks replied. The Vorth Empire thought they could attack human colonies without consequences. We're teaching them that fighting humans is more expensive than leaving us alone. The Vorth officers agreed to all demands without negotiation. They had lost more than a battle. They had lost confidence in their ability to fight humans at all. The psychological damage would spread throughout their military, making future conflicts less likely. But the humans weren't finished. As Vorth transport ships arrived to evacuate their defeated forces, human soldiers made sure the withdrawal was as humiliating as possible. Vorth officers were required to apologize personally to human colonists. Vorth soldiers had to help repair damage they had caused during the occupation. Every aspect of the evacuation was designed to reinforce the message that attacking humans led to shame and defeat. This seems unnecessarily cruel, Zix Theta said to Captain Morrison. You've already won. Why continue to humiliate defeated enemies? Because humiliated enemies tell stories to their friends, Morrison replied. Every Vorth soldier who leaves New Haven will remember how humans made them feel. They'll think twice before volunteering for future attacks on human worlds. Dr. Grant provided the final explanation that made Zixta Theta realize the true scope of human strategic thinking. "We didn't just fight a battle for New Haven," she said. "We fought a psychological war against the entire Vorth Empire. Every tactic we used here will be reported to Vorth Military Command. They'll study our methods and realize that fighting humans means facing an enemy that attacks on levels they don't understand. You're using this single battle to influence future conflicts? We're using this battle to prevent future conflicts. The Vorth Empire now knows that occupying human colonies means fighting an enemy that will use every possible advantage, ignore conventional military limitations, and continue fighting until the enemy breaks completely. Most species will decide that's not worth the risk." As the last Vorth transport ship departed New Haven, Zixta Theta tried to process everything that had been witnessed. The humans had won a decisive victory without losing a single major battle. They had defeated a larger, better-equipped enemy using tactics that existed at the intersection of warfare, psychology, and strategic communications. But most disturbing of all, they had done it while treating their own soldiers as expendable resources. Private Walsh was still fighting with a serious infection. Other human Marines had sustained injuries that would have ended military careers in any other species, but continued serving because they believed the mission was more important than their personal welfare. The New Haven campaign was over, but Zixta Theta suspected the Observer had only seen the beginning of what humans were capable of accomplishing when they decided to wage war. With New Haven liberated, Zixta Theta expected the mission to end. The human forces had achieved complete victory, and the Observer had gathered extensive documentation about their military capabilities. But Captain Morrison had different plans. "We're not going home yet," he announced during the post-battle briefing. "Command has assigned us to support operations in the Kepler system. The Vorth have fortified positions there, and other human fleets need our expertise." Zixta Theta felt a chill of dread. The Observer had hoped never to witness human combat methods again, but now would be forced to watch them applied on an even larger scale. During the 3-day journey to Kepler, Dr. Grant began sharing information that made Zixta Theta question everything about human nature. The ship's database contained records of human military history, and the doctor seemed eager to explain how her species had developed their approach to warfare. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years," she began. "We've used every possible weapon and tactic against our own species. Chemical weapons, biological warfare, nuclear bombs, psychological operations, economic destruction, cultural elimination. We've tried everything." Zixta Theta listened with growing horror as Dr. Grant described human conflicts that had killed millions of their own kind. Wars fought over territory, resources, religion, and ideology. Battles where humans showed no mercy to other humans, using weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. "Your species fought wars to completely destroy other human populations?" Zixta Theta asked, many times. "We call it genocide when the goal is to eliminate entire groups of people. It's considered one of the worst crimes possible, but it still happens. Humans are very good at killing other humans. But how can you function as a civilization if your species is constantly at war with itself?" Dr. Grant smiled with an expression that made Zixta Theta's skin crawl. "Because we learned that external enemies are more useful than internal ones. When humans have a common threat to fight, we work together very effectively. The Vorth Empire gives us something to unite against." The doctor showed Zixta Theta video recordings of human entertainment media, movies, television shows, and games that depicted violence, warfare, and conflict as exciting adventures. Human children played with toy weapons and pretended to kill imaginary enemies. Human adults paid money to watch fictional stories about war and destruction. "Your culture celebrates violence," Zixta Theta observed. "Our culture understands violence," Dr. Grant corrected. "We don't pretend that conflict doesn't exist or that enemies can always be reasoned with. We accept that sometimes the only solution is to make the other side stop fighting, permanently." The journey to Kepler gave Zixta Theta time to study the human crew more carefully. What the Observer discovered was deeply disturbing. These weren't savage primitives who fought because they didn't know better. They were intelligent, educated beings who had chosen to become weapons. Corporal Kate Miller had studied advanced chemistry and engineering before joining the military. She used her scientific knowledge to create explosives and chemical weapons that caused maximum psychological impact. Sergeant Davis had a degree in psychology and used his understanding of mind to break enemy morale. Even Private Walsh, despite his infected wound and drug-impaired judgment, could discuss complex tactical theory with remarkable clarity. "You're not primitive warriors," Zix Theta said to Amy Brooks. "You're scientists who have turned your intelligence toward creating better ways to destroy enemies." "Finally, you're beginning to understand," she replied. "Humans aren't naturally violent. We're naturally intelligent. We've simply applied our intelligence to the problem of warfare more thoroughly than other species." When the USS Defiant arrived at Kepler, Zix Theta saw the full scope of human military operations. 12 human ships were engaged in combat against a Vorth fleet twice their size. But the battle wasn't following any conventional pattern. The human ships moved in seemingly random patterns, never staying in one location long enough for Vorth gunners to target them effectively. Their weapons fired in coordinated patterns that created overlapping fields of destruction. Most importantly, they were broadcasting signals that interfered with Vorth communication systems. "The other fleets learned our New Haven tactics," Captain Morrison explained. "Now they're applying psychological warfare on a fleet-level scale." The Vorth ships were trying to fight a conventional space battle, but the humans had changed the rules. Every time Vorth commanders issued orders, those orders were intercepted, modified, and rebroadcast to create confusion. Vorth sensors were jammed with false information that made human ships appear to be in multiple locations simultaneously. Within 6 hours, the Vorth fleet was in complete disarray. Ships fired at each other by mistake, followed contradictory orders, and lost formation discipline. The humans picked off isolated vessels one by one, using tactics that minimized their own casualties while maximizing enemy losses. "You're not just winning battles," Zix Theta realized. "You're conducting experiments in warfare. Each engagement teaches you better methods for the next fight." "Every war is a learning opportunity," Dr. Grant agreed. "We study what works, what doesn't work, and how to improve our methods. That's why humans keep getting better at fighting, while other species stay the same." The ground battle for Kepler's main planet was even more horrifying than New Haven. The human forces had perfected their psychological warfare techniques and were applying them with scientific precision. They used the planet's own weather control systems to create storms that prevented Vorth air support from operating effectively. They contaminated water supplies with harmless bacteria that caused digestive problems, making enemy soldiers weak and demoralized. Most disturbing of all, they had begun using captured Vorth communications to spread disinformation among enemy forces. False reports of human atrocities convinced some Vorth units to abandon their positions without fighting. Fake orders from Vorth commanders caused friendly fire incidents that destroyed enemy equipment and morale. "You're making the Vorth fight themselves," Zix Theta observed. "The most efficient victory is one where the enemy defeats itself," Amy Brooks replied. "Why waste ammunition when you can convince enemies to shoot each other instead?" Private Walsh had finally collapsed from his infected wound and was undergoing emergency surgery aboard the ship. But even from his medical bed, he was providing tactical advice to his replacement and insisting that he would return to active duty as soon as possible. "That soldier is going to die if he continues fighting," Zix Theta told Dr. Grant. "Probably, but he'll die knowing that his sacrifice helped win the war. That's more important to him than living a few extra years in peace." How can death in battle be more important than life itself? Because humans understand that some things are worth dying for. Freedom, protection of our people, the defeat of enemies who threaten our way of life. Individual survival isn't the highest priority for our species. The Kepler campaign ended after 2 weeks with complete human victory. The Vorth forces surrendered unconditionally and agreed to abandon their claims to all coalition territory. But the cost of victory was becoming clear to Zix Theta. The humans had won by becoming something inhuman. They had abandoned mercy, ignored individual welfare, and embraced methods that treated enemies as psychological experiments rather than living beings. They were efficient, effective, and absolutely terrifying. As the human fleet prepared to return to coalition space, Zix Theta received a message from Commander Velnari requesting a preliminary report. The Cathalari Command wanted to know if humans deserved full coalition membership. Zix Theta stared at the communication device for a long time before responding. How could the observer explain what had been witnessed? How could anyone understand the true nature of human warfare without seeing it firsthand? The preliminary report contained only basic information about human tactical capabilities and their successful campaigns against the Orth, but Zix Theta knew that the final report would need to address much more serious questions about whether the galaxy was ready for a species that treated war as a science and violence as a tool of policy. The journey back to Coalition space would give the observer time to prepare that report. But Zixitheta already knew that no words could adequately describe the nightmare of watching humans wage war against their enemies. The return journey to Coalition space took longer than expected because Captain Morrison received new orders along the way. Instead of heading directly home, the USS Defiant was directed to rendezvous with a massive human fleet assembling at the edge of Vorth Empire territory. When they arrived at the meeting point, Zixtheta saw something that made the observer's forearms tremble with fear. Nearly 200 human warships floated in formation, representing the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. But what terrified Zixitheta wasn't the number of ships, it was what they were preparing to do. "This is Admiral Helen Burke," Captain Morrison announced as a new human joined their command meetings. "She's coordinating Operation Final Strike." Admiral Burke was an older human with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to look right through anyone she spoke to. She carried herself with absolute confidence and spoke in a voice that expected immediate obedience. "Observer Zixitheta," she said, "you've been documenting human military capabilities for several weeks. What you're about to witness will complete your education about how humans wage war when we stop holding back." Zixitheta felt sick. If everything witnessed so far had been the humans holding back, what were they capable of when they used their full power? Admiral Burke explained the strategic situation. The Vorth Empire had been defeated in every major battle against human forces, but their central government refused to surrender. Vorth leaders believed they could outlast humanity in a long war of attrition, forcing humans to eventually accept a negotiated settlement. "They're wrong," Admiral Burke said simply. "We're going to end this war in the next 30 days by making continued resistance impossible for them." The plan she outlined was unlike anything Zixitheta had ever heard described in military terms. The human fleet would simultaneously attack 12 major Vorth worlds, but not with conventional invasions. Instead, they would systematically destroy the infrastructure that allowed Vorth civilization to function. "We're not targeting military installations," Admiral Burke explained. "We're targeting power grids, communication networks, transportation systems, food distribution centers, and manufacturing facilities. We're going to make it impossible for the Vorth Empire to maintain a technological society. That will affect civilian populations," Zixitheta protested. "Millions of innocent Vorth citizens will suffer." "Millions of innocent Coalition citizens have already suffered because of Vorth aggression," Admiral Burke replied. "This war ends when the Vorth government decides that continuing to fight costs more than surrender. We're going to make that decision very easy for them." Dr. Grant provided Zixitheta with detailed information about the operation's psychological components. Human forces would broadcast continuous propaganda to Vorth civilian populations, explaining exactly why their infrastructure was being destroyed and what they needed to do to make it stop. "We're not randomly attacking civilian targets," she said. "We're conducting a coordinated campaign to convince the Vorth people that their government's policies are causing their suffering. When they put enough pressure on their leaders to end the war, the attacks will stop immediately." "But this is terrorism on a planetary scale," Zixitheta said. "No, this is war on a planetary scale," Dr. Grant corrected. "Terrorism targets random civilians to create fear. We're targeting specific infrastructure to achieve specific political objectives. The Vorth government can end their people's suffering at any time by surrendering." The first phase of Operation Final Strike began 3 days later. Human fleets arrived simultaneously at 12 Vorth worlds and began precise attacks on infrastructure targets. Power plants shut down, leaving cities in darkness. Communication towers were destroyed, isolating communities from each other. Transportation networks were sabotaged, preventing the movement of supplies and people. But the humans didn't just destroy things randomly. Every attack was carefully planned to create maximum psychological impact while minimizing actual casualties. Power plants were disabled rather than destroyed, so they could be repaired after the war. Communication systems were jammed rather than eliminated, so they could broadcast human propaganda. Transportation networks were blocked rather than obliterated, so they could resume operation when hostilities ended. "You're not trying to kill Vorth civilians," Zixitheta observed. You're trying to make them miserable enough to force their government to surrender. Killing civilians would make them hate us and fight harder, Admiral Burke explained. Making them uncomfortable but keeping them alive makes them blame their own government for the war. It's much more effective. Zix Theta watched the operations through communication links with human forces across 12 star systems. The coordination was perfect, the timing was precise, and the results were exactly what the humans had predicted. Within 72 hours, Vorth civilian populations were experiencing widespread power outages, communication blackouts, and transportation disruptions. More importantly, they were receiving constant broadcasts explaining that these problems would end immediately if their government agreed to a ceasefire and peace negotiations. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorth civilians began demanding that their government end the war, rather than continue fighting. Protests erupted on all 12 worlds. Local officials faced crowds of angry citizens who wanted normal life to resume. Your species has turned an entire empire against its own government, Zix Theta said to Dr. Grant. We've shown the Vorth people the true cost of their leaders' aggressive policies, she replied. Most civilians don't want to fight wars. They want to live normal lives with electricity, communication, and transportation. When those things disappear because of government decisions, people get upset. But the humans weren't satisfied with civilian pressure alone. Phase 2 of Operation Final Strike targeted the Vorth military's ability to continue fighting. Human forces used advanced cyber warfare techniques to penetrate Vorth military communication networks, not to destroy them but to control them. Suddenly, Vorth military units across the Empire began receiving contradictory orders, false intelligence reports, and fake casualty updates. Commanders lost confidence in their communication systems and began making independent decisions that weren't coordinated with other units. You've turned their own military communication network into a weapon against them, Zix Theta realized. Information warfare is the most effective form of combat, Admiral Burke said. When enemies can't trust their own sources of information, they can't coordinate effective resistance. The cyber warfare campaign was supported by psychological operations on a scale that dwarfed anything Zix Theta had seen at New Haven. Human forces broadcast fake news reports about Vorth military defeats, created false evidence of government corruption, and spread rumors about peace negotiations that made military resistance seem pointless. Within 1 week, Vorth military morale collapsed across multiple star systems. Units began surrendering without fighting, and some actually joined civilian protests demanding an end to the war. Private Walsh had finally died from his infected wound, but not before training his replacement and providing tactical advice for Operation Final Strike. His death affected the human crew deeply, but it didn't slow their military operations at all. Your soldiers die, but your war machine continues functioning, Zix Theta observed. Individual humans are replaceable, Captain Morrison said. Our tactics, training, and strategic objectives are not. Walsh trained someone to take his place, so his knowledge and experience survive even though he doesn't. How can you view your own people as replaceable components in a military system? Because that's the only way to win wars against enemies who want to destroy our entire civilization. If we prioritized individual survival over military effectiveness, we'd lose conflicts and everyone would die anyway. Phase 3 of Operation Final Strike was the most psychologically devastating of all. Human forces began targeting Vorth cultural and religious sites, not to destroy them, but to occupy them and use them as broadcasting centers for propaganda operations. Vorth citizens watched, helplessly as humans took control of their most sacred locations and used them to broadcast messages about the futility of continued resistance. The psychological impact was enormous as it demonstrated that nothing the Vorth valued was safe from human control. You're attacking their sense of identity and cultural pride, Zix Theta said. We're demonstrating that continued resistance will cost them everything they value, Admiral Burke replied. Their infrastructure, their security, their cultural heritage, and their hope for the future. Surrender is the only way they can preserve anything. 2 weeks into Operation Final Strike, the Vorth Empire government finally contacted coalition diplomats requesting immediate ceasefire and peace negotiations. The human response was swift and final: complete withdrawal from all coalition territory, massive war reparations, and acceptance of permanent monitoring to prevent future aggression. The Vorth agreed to every demand without negotiation. As the human fleets began standing down from combat operations, Zix Theta tried to comprehend what had been witnessed. An entire galactic empire had been brought to its knees in less than a month by psychological warfare, infrastructure attacks, and information manipulation. The humans had won the war without fighting a single large-scale battle. The victory celebration aboard the USS Defiant was unlike anything Zix Theta had expected. The human crew didn't act like conquerors who had just defeated a galactic empire. Instead, they behaved like workers who had completed a difficult but necessary job. "Why aren't your people more excited about winning the war?" Zix Theta asked Captain Morrison. "Because winning wars isn't something to celebrate," he replied. "It's something that sometimes has to be done. We're relieved that it's over, but we're not happy that it was necessary." This attitude confused Zix Theta even more than the humans' tactical brutality. The observer had expected a species that enjoyed violence and destruction, but these humans seemed to view warfare as an unpleasant duty rather than an exciting adventure. Dr. Grant provided the explanation that finally made Zix Theta understand the true horror of humanity. "We don't fight because we like fighting," she said. "We fight because we're very, very good at it, and sometimes it's the only solution to serious problems." The Fourth Empire was attacking innocent people. Diplomacy failed. Economic pressure failed. The only thing left was to make them stop through the application of superior force. But your methods were so cruel, so psychologically devastating. Our methods were effective. Cruelty would be using inefficient tactics that prolonged the war and caused more total suffering. We ended a galactic conflict in less than 2 months with minimal casualties on both sides. A conventional war would have lasted years and killed millions more people. Zix Theta began to realize that human warfare operated on principles that other species had never developed. They didn't fight to prove their courage or defend their honor. They fought to solve problems, and they approached warfare with the same methodical intelligence they applied to engineering, science, or medicine. "Your species treats war like a technical challenge," Zix Theta said. "Because that's what it is," Dr. Grant replied. "The problem is that an enemy wants to hurt innocent people and won't stop voluntarily. The solution is to make them stop involuntarily by removing their ability and desire to continue. We use whatever methods accomplish that goal most efficiently." Over the next few days, as the ship traveled back toward Coalition space, Zix Theta learned more about human culture and history. The observer discovered that humans had indeed fought many terrible wars among themselves, but they had also worked constantly to develop better ways to prevent and end conflicts. Captain Morrison showed Zix Theta records of human diplomatic efforts, international laws, and peacekeeping organizations. Humans had created elaborate systems designed to resolve disputes without violence, and they preferred to use those systems whenever possible. "We've been trying to eliminate war for centuries," Morrison explained. "We've made a lot of progress. Human societies rarely fight each other anymore, and we've developed many alternatives to military conflict. But when those alternatives fail, we're prepared to fight, and we fight to win quickly and permanently." "You're not a naturally violent species," Zix Theta realized. "You're a naturally intelligent species that has become very good at violence when it's necessary." "Exactly. Violence is a tool we use when other tools don't work. We don't enjoy using it, but we use it very effectively because we understand that ineffective violence causes more suffering than effective violence." The human approach to warfare was based on principles that seemed contradictory to other species. They were simultaneously more merciful and more ruthless than any enemy they faced. They worked harder to avoid civilian casualties while being more willing to attack civilian infrastructure. They showed respect for enemy soldiers while using psychological tactics that traumatized them permanently. "We try to minimize death while maximizing defeat," Dr. Grant explained. "A dead enemy can't surrender or change their behavior. A psychologically broken enemy will never fight us again, and will convince others not to fight us either." Zix Theta began studying human entertainment media more carefully and made a disturbing discovery. While humans did create movies, books, and games about warfare, they also created just as much entertainment about peace, cooperation, and mutual understanding between different groups. Human children played with toy weapons, but they also played games about building things, helping others, and solving problems through cooperation. Human adults watched violent movies, but they also watched stories about love, friendship, and people working together to overcome challenges. Your culture doesn't actually glorify violence, Zixa Theta said to Amy Brooks. It explores violence as one possible response to problems, but it also explores many other responses. We try to understand all aspects of the human experience, Brooks replied. That includes our capacity for violence, but it also includes our capacity for compassion, creativity, and cooperation. We think it's dangerous to ignore any part of human nature. This balanced approach to human nature explained something that had puzzled Zixa Theta throughout the mission. The same humans who had used ruthless psychological warfare against the Vorth also showed genuine care for their own wounded soldiers, concern for civilian casualties, and respect for enemies who surrendered. They weren't monsters who enjoyed causing suffering. They were intelligent beings who understood that sometimes causing limited suffering was necessary to prevent greater suffering. You fight brutal wars in order to create lasting peace, Zixa Theta said. We fight effective wars in order to solve problems permanently, Dr. Grant corrected. The Vorth Empire was a problem for the entire galaxy. Now it's not a problem anymore, and it won't become a problem again. That's worth some temporary brutality. As the USS Defiant approached Coalition space, Zixa Theta received another message from Commander Velnari, requesting an updated progress report. The Kethalari commander was especially interested in human weapons technology and tactical doctrines. Zixa Theta realized that Velnari was thinking about humans the same way the observer had thought about them at the beginning of the mission. The commander expected to receive technical specifications for human equipment and descriptions of their military procedures. But the reality was much more complex and disturbing than that. Human military effectiveness didn't come from superior technology or advanced weapons. It came from their willingness to think about warfare in ways that other species had never imagined, and their ability to use intelligence, psychology, and cultural understanding as weapons. Your greatest military asset isn't your technology, Zixa Theta said to Captain Morrison. It's your ability to understand your enemies better than they understand themselves. That's probably true, Morrison agreed. We study other species very carefully. We learn how they think, what they fear, what they value, and what motivates them. Then we use that knowledge to predict their behavior and influence their decisions. But doesn't that make you feel manipulative? It makes us feel effective. Would you prefer that we didn't understand our enemies? Would random violence based on ignorance be more moral than targeted pressure based on knowledge? Zixa Theta couldn't answer that question. The human approach to warfare was more sophisticated and more psychologically devastating than anything the observer had ever encountered. But it was also more precise and caused less total destruction than conventional military methods. As the ship prepared to dock at a Coalition space station, Zixa Theta faced the most difficult part of the entire mission, writing a final report that would determine how the galaxy responded to humanity's request for full Coalition membership. The report would need to address not just human military capabilities, but the fundamental question of whether other species could safely coexist with a civilization that had turned warfare into a science and violence into a precision tool. Zixa Theta had seen humans fight a war and win it completely, but the observer had also learned that humans were far more complex and potentially dangerous than anyone in the Coalition had suspected. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for that truth. The humans have been accepted into the Coalition, but I fear we may have just admitted a species that will eventually reshape galactic civilization according to their own principles. They are not evil, but they are effective in ways that other species cannot match or counter. We must ensure they remain our friends, because we cannot survive having them as enemies. Zixa Theta sealed the message and prepared for SLE. 3 days after returning to Coalition space, Zixa Theta stood before the Grand Council in the massive chamber that served as the political heart of the galaxy. Representatives from 47 different species filled the circular seating arrangement, all waiting to hear the observer's report on human military capabilities. Commander Velnari had briefed Zixa Theta on what the council expected to hear. Technical specifications for human weapons, analysis of their tactical doctrines, and recommendations about their readiness for full Coalition membership. It should have been a routine presentation followed by a simple vote. Instead, Zixa Theta was about to deliver a report that would change how the galaxy thought about warfare, violence, and the nature of intelligent species. Honored representatives, Zixa Theta began, I have completed my observation of human military operations against the Vorth Empire. What I witnessed requires careful explanation, because human warfare operates on principles that differ fundamentally from our common understanding of civilized combat. The council chamber was completely silent. Representatives leaned forward in their seats, expecting to hear about primitive human tactics and simple weapons. The humans defeated the Vorth Empire completely in less than 2 months, Zix Theta continued. They achieved this victory not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through the systematic application of psychological warfare, infrastructure attacks, and information manipulation on a scale never before documented in galactic history. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. The Vorth Empire had been considered one of the most dangerous military threats in the galaxy. The human approach to warfare targets not just enemy military forces, but enemy psychology, culture, and social structures. They attack the enemy's ability to think clearly, communicate effectively, and maintain unit cohesion. Their tactics are designed to break the enemy's will to fight, rather than simply destroying enemy forces. Zix Theta described the New Haven campaign, explaining how humans had used fear, confusion, and psychological pressure to defeat a superior enemy force. The council representatives listened with growing unease as the observer detailed human methods that violated conventional understanding of military ethics. Human soldiers view their own lives as resources to be expended in pursuit of military objectives. They continue fighting despite injuries that would disable soldiers from other species. They accept personal sacrifice and permanent damage as acceptable costs of victory. This sounds like barbaric behavior, interrupted the Vorthak representative, a species known for their rigid military traditions. Civilized armies do not treat soldiers as expendable tools. That is precisely the point, Zix Theta replied. Human warfare is not civilized by our standards, but it is highly effective. The Vorth Empire agreed to complete surrender and massive reparations rather than continue fighting humans using these methods. The observer continued with descriptions of Operation Final Strike, explaining how humans had brought an entire galactic empire to its knees through coordinated attacks on infrastructure and psychological operations. They demonstrated the ability to turn an enemy population against its own government through precisely targeted pressure campaigns. They used the enemy's own communication networks as weapons. They attacked cultural and religious sites not to destroy them, but to use them as platforms for psychological warfare. These methods sound like terrorism, said the Kethalari representative. No, Zix Theta said firmly. Terrorism targets random civilians to create fear. Human military operations target specific objectives to achieve specific political goals. Every action serves a strategic purpose, and attacks stop immediately when enemies surrender. But surely such methods violate coalition agreements about acceptable combat practices, pressed the Altarian representative. Human methods technically comply with coalition warfare conventions, Zix Theta admitted. They cause minimal civilian casualties, they accept enemy surrenders, and they provide medical care to prisoners. But they accomplish these things while simultaneously conducting psychological operations that traumatize enemy forces and civilian populations. The council chamber erupted in concerned discussions. Representatives spoke urgently among themselves about the implications of accepting a species that fought wars using such methods. Zix Theta waited for the conversations to quiet before continuing with the most important part of the report. I must emphasize that humans do not fight because they enjoy violence. They fight because they are extremely effective at solving problems through the application of force, and they view warfare as a necessary tool when other methods fail. How can we trust a species that treats war as a tool? Asked the Delphinian representative. Because they also work harder than any other species to avoid war, Zix Theta replied. Humans have developed extensive diplomatic protocols, international legal systems, and peacekeeping organizations. They prefer to solve problems without violence. But when violence becomes necessary, they apply it with scientific precision. The observer described human culture in more detail, explaining how humans balance their capacity for violence with equally strong tendencies toward cooperation, creativity, and compassion. They are not monsters who enjoy causing suffering. They are intelligent beings who understand that sometimes limited suffering is necessary to prevent greater suffering. Their brutal efficiency in warfare serves the goal of ending conflicts quickly and permanently. What do you recommend regarding their application for full coalition membership? Asked the council chairman. Zix Theta had struggled with this question for days. The honest answer was that humans were simultaneously the most valuable, potential allies and the most dangerous possible enemies the coalition could face. I recommend that we accept humans as full coalition members, Zix Theta said finally. But I also recommend that we never, under any circumstances, give them reason to view the coalition as a threat. The chamber fell silent again as representatives considered the implications of that statement. Humans have proven that they can defeat enemies far more advanced than themselves, using methods that other species cannot defend against. They fight wars that attack the enemy's mind, culture, and social structures. They treat their own soldiers as expendable resources and their own lives as acceptable sacrifices for military objectives. Zix Theta paused to let that information sink in before continuing. But they have also proven that they are loyal allies who will use these same devastating methods to protect coalition worlds and coalition citizens. The choice we face is simple. We can have humans as allies, or we can potentially face them as enemies. There is no option that removes human military capabilities from the galactic strategic equation. Are you saying we should accept them because we're afraid of them? Asked the Kethlari representative. I'm saying we should accept them because they are effective partners in maintaining galactic peace and security, and because the alternative is potentially catastrophic for all coalition species. Zix Theta activated a holographic display showing casualty figures from the Vorth War. Human methods resulted in the complete defeat of the Vorth Empire with fewer than 10,000 total casualties on both sides. A conventional war using coalition military doctrine would have lasted years and killed millions. Human warfare is brutal, but it is also efficient. The final part of Zix Theta's report addressed the long-term implications of human coalition membership. Humans will change how wars are fought in this galaxy. Other species will either adapt to human methods or find themselves unable to compete militarily. The era of civilized limited warfare between advanced species is ending. Humans have demonstrated that intelligence can be a more powerful weapon than any technology. What happens if humans decide to use these methods against coalition members? Asked the Vorthak representative. Then we will discover what it means to face an enemy that understands us better than we understand ourselves, Zix Theta replied. That is why maintaining human loyalty and friendship must become our highest strategic priority. The council debate continued for 3 hours. Representatives argued about the risks and benefits of accepting humans, the implications of their military methods, and the precedent it would set for future coalition membership applications. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Humans were accepted as full coalition members with all associated rights and responsibilities. But as representatives filed out of the chamber, Zix Theta heard their private conversations and knew that the galaxy would never be the same. Some species were already discussing how to adapt their own military forces to human methods. Others were talking about diplomatic strategies to ensure they remained on humanity's good side. Everyone understood that they were now sharing the galaxy with a species that had turned warfare into a science and violence into a precision instrument of policy. That night, alone in private quarters, Zix Theta composed a personal message to Commander Velnari.